At the beginning, emotional abuse rarely announces itself with cruelty. It enters quietly, almost politely, through small corrections to your experience. You remember a conversation clearly, yet you're told it never happened. You express hurt, and you're informed that you're too sensitive. These moments seem insignificant in isolation, but psychologically, they are profound. What is being challenged is not the event itself, but your authority over your own perception. Carl Jung understood that when a person loses trust in their inner experience, the ego becomes unanchored, searching externally for validation and certainty. This is how reality distortion works. The abuser does not replace your reality with theirs all at once. They weaken yours first. Each denial, each subtle contradiction, erodes your confidence in your own judgment. Slowly, you begin to consult them before consulting yourself. You hesitate before reacting. You question your memory, your emotional accuracy, even your sanity. The danger here is not confusion, it is dependency. When your inner compass is dismantled, the abuser becomes the reference point for truth. Jung warned that when consciousness is fractured, the psyche becomes vulnerable to domination. In this state, you are no longer relating as to equal individuals. You are adapting to survive within someone else's psychological framework. And once this adaptation becomes habitual, manipulation no longer needs force. It operates automatically. The moment you realize that your confusion was cultivated, not accidentally, you take the first step back toward yourself. Awareness restores orientation. And when you reclaim trust in your perception, control quietly collapses. Once your sense of reality has been destabilized, the emotional abuser takes the next step. They turn your feelings into evidence against you. Your anger becomes proof that you are unstable. Your sadness is labeled manipulation. Your need for clarity is reframed as obsession. What is crucial to understand is that emotions themselves are not the problem here. In Jungian psychology, emotions are signals from the unconscious message, pointing toward unmet needs, violated boundaries, or inner conflict. But the abuser does not want you listening to those signals. They want you doubting them. By consistently reacting to your emotional responses with ridicule, dismissal, or moral judgment, the abuser trains you to associate feeling with shame. You begin to suppress your reactions, not because they are wrong, but because they are used against you. This is where projection enters the picture. Jung described projection as the act of disowning one's inner chaos and locating it in another. The abuser's emotional volatility, insecurity, or lack of regulation is quietly transferred onto you, while they position themselves as calm, rational, and superior. Over time, you internalize this framing. You start monitoring your tone, editing your words, and apologizing for reactions that would be considered reasonable in any healthy relationship. The deeper tragedy is that you begin to mistrust your own emotional intelligence. And when a person is disconnected from their emotions, they are disconnected from their instincts. The turning point arrives when you stop asking whether your feelings are acceptable and start asking what they are trying to tell you. Emotions are not enemies to be controlled. They are guides to be understood, and reclaiming them is an act of psychological self-respect. As this dynamic deepens, something more disorienting begins to happen. Responsibility quietly changes hands. You notice that conflicts no longer begin with what was done to you, but with how you responded to it. The original behavior fades into the background while your reaction is placed under a microscope. This is the moment the roles reverse. You are no longer the person responding to harm. You are presented as the source of it. Psychologically, this works because the human mind is wired to seek resolution. When tension arises, we instinctively look for our part in it. The emotional abuser exploits this impulse. By provoking, withdrawing, or subtly undermining you, they elicit a reaction, then position themselves as wounded by that reaction. In Jungian terms, cause and effect are inverted. The abuser disowns their initiating behavior and assigns it to you, allowing them to maintain a self-image of innocence while you carry the burden of guilt. The more you try to explain yourself, the deeper the trap becomes. Explanation is reframed as defensiveness. Clarification is labeled aggression. Silence is interpreted as proof of wrongdoing. No response leads to resolution, because resolution was never the goal. Control was. Over time, you find yourself preoccupied with managing how you appear rather than addressing what actually happened. This is how self-trust erodes. Jung believed that when a person is forced to live in contradiction, the psyche fractures. You begin to doubt not only your actions, but your moral standing. And when you accept blame for what you did not cause, You surrender your psychological authority. The moment you recognize this reversal, you reclaim your position as an observer rather than the accused, and that shift alone begins to restore your freedom. As self-doubt takes root, the emotional abuser no longer needs to argue as much. Instead, they begin reshaping your world. This is where isolation enters, not through commands or threats, but through suggestion and psychological conditioning. You mention a friend, and they subtly question their intentions. You seek advice, and they imply that others are biased or don't really know you. Over time, these small remarks accumulate, and without realizing it, you start filtering your reality through the abuser's perspective alone. Jung emphasized that the psyche requires reflection. We understand ourselves through mirrors, other minds, other voices, other experiences. When those mirrors are removed, the self becomes unstable. Isolation weakens discernment because there is no external reference to challenge the internal confusion already planted. The abuser understands this intuitively. By positioning themselves as the only one who truly understands you, they become the gatekeeper of meaning, truth, and reassurance. Eventually, you begin to self-isolate, not because you are forbidden to connect, but because connection feels dangerous. You anticipate conflict if others disagree with the abuser's narrative. You fear being misunderstood. So you withdraw, believing this is peace, when in reality it is psychological contraction. The smaller your world becomes, the larger the abuser's influence grows. This is not independence, it is containment. And it is profoundly destabilizing because human beings are not designed to orient themselves in isolation. We need dialogue to stay psychologically grounded. The moment you allow another perspective back into your life, even a small one, you interrupt the conditioning. And in that interruption, clarity begins to return. No one controls a mind that is allowed to reflect freely. After isolation has taken hold, the emotional landscape shifts inward. The abuser no longer needs to accuse you openly, because the accusation has already been internalized. You begin living with a persistent sense of guilt, even in moments of calm. There is a constant feeling that something is wrong, and that whatever it is, it must be coming from you. This is where emotional abuse becomes self-sustaining. The abuser reinforces this by offering conditional peace. Conflict, they imply, would disappear if you were more patient, more understanding, more restrained. So you turn your attention inward, endlessly adjusting yourself. You analyze your words after conversation. You replay situations in your mind, searching for the flaw that caused the tension. Jung would recognize this as a misdirected moral burden, where responsibility is severed from reality and attached to the self as a character defect. What makes this stage especially dangerous is that it feels virtuous. Self-reflection is generally healthy, but here it becomes compulsive and punishing. Growth is replaced by self-surveillance. You are no longer asking, was I treated fairly, but how can I be less of a problem? Meanwhile, the abuser remains unchanged, untouched by scrutiny. The imbalance deepens because only one person is evolving, and not toward wholeness, but toward erasure. Over time, guilt becomes addictive. It gives the illusion of control. If the problem is you, then fixing yourself feels like a solution. But it is a false solution that keeps you trapped. The shift begins when you ask a different question, not how to improve yourself, but whether the situation requires improvement at all. Guilt that demands your disappearance is not growth. It is a warning. At some point, often quietly, awareness begins to return. Not as anger or confrontation, but as pattern recognition. You notice that the confusion follows a rhythm, that the guilt appears on schedule, that peace is always conditional. This is the moment Jung would describe as consciousness emerging from the unconscious. You stop asking, what is wrong with me? And begin asking, what keeps repeating here? That single shift changes everything. Awakening in this context is not dramatic. It is sobering. You realize that your exhaustion was not caused by your flaws, but by sustained psychological contradiction. The same behaviors that once kept you trapped, self-reflection, empathy, accountability, are now redirected outward, toward the structure of the relationship itself. You are no longer inside the maze trying to fix it. You are standing above it, observing its design. This awareness dissolves the illusion of power the abuser relied on. Manipulation functions only when it remains unnamed. Once the pattern is seen, the emotional charge weakens. You no longer feel compelled to explain yourself endlessly or prove your goodness. Jung believed that what is made conscious can no longer control us blindly. In this sense, Awareness is not just insight, it is liberation. From here, choice becomes possible. Whether that choice is distance, boundaries, or departure, it is made from clarity rather than fear. You are no longer reacting, you are responding. The most important realization is this: you were never broken, you were disoriented. And orientation is restored the moment you trust your perception again and act in alignment with it.